Arizona Secretary of State Michele Reagan has been involved in a disagreement with the Clean Elections Commission over jurisdiction of enforcement of campaign law violations for certain types of candidates. Here now to talk about that and more is Arizona Secretary of State Michele Reagan. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me back.
Before we get into all that other stuff, your impressions of the job, is it what you expected? Any surprises, challenges? How's it going?
It's a dream job, and it's everything I expected and then some. So it's a very, very big agency, bigger than I think most people realize. About a $20 million agency, 160 employees, 11 locations around the state. And I'm just loving every minute of it. So
I know that you've talked about improving and updating campaign finance laws. What needs improving? What needs updating?
Well, you know, right before I was sworn in, we were kind of dealt a little blow with the Galassini ruling, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but just that a federal judge basically ruled our definition of political committee unconstitutional. That's kind of pretty much everything the elections division bases pretty much everything on. That, and so we had to go to the legislature right when the legislature started. So new legislature, new Secretary of State, definition of political committee null and void.
Yes.
So we had to go to the legislature and ask them to write a new one. And so we basically we were, you know, right in the thick of it with them. So the biggest new thing with campaign finance laws would be the new definition of political committee, which has yet to take effect because new laws haven't taken effect yet.
Indeed. And, again, without getting too deep in the weeds, the Attorney General dropped his appeal on this ruling from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals regarding the original definition too vague. I know that the new law is coming into effect, but by dropping the appeal, what does that mean? Because could not the legislature, if the court case can, you could still get a new definition of a committee, couldn't you?
And yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Again, what was just so important is that we got to the legislature. We were able to find an excellent sponsor to just push it through the way that it seemed that the federal judge was going to agree was constitutional. And again, you know, when you're working with the legislature, you want to make sure things aren't hung on to the bill and added to it that are going to get hung up into the court system. And so we were able to get a clean bill out of there, and something that the Galassini lawyer seemed to like too. So we were a little, again, Attorney General's a new administration as well, so we're all kind of learning the ropes here, and we would like their agreement that this is a good definition of political committee. But I think what's most important is the legislature liked this, the governor signed it, and the judges seem to be happy with this, that it's constitutional. So,
and when we talked earlier about improving and updating, modernizing campaign finance laws, does dark money need to be addressed?
I think the big issue that needs to be addressed is transparency, and so I'm really glad you brought that up, because this was something, as soon as I got into office, as soon as I was sworn in and I took a look at what the Secretary of State does and what the Secretary of State can do, I got really excited because I thought, wow, I actually get to do something on the issue of transparency. And this is where I was able to start working right away, where I can do something right now on the issue where I couldn't do something in the legislature. You know, in the legislature, you've got to try to pass a bill and get something signed. Same thing with Congress, or, you know, and quite frankly, a lot of the dark money problems are going to have to be solved with the IRS or the federal government. But as Secretary of State, on the problem right now with transparency, and we're working with the Clean Elections Commission on programs, a really big project called the Follow the Money Project, and that's going to be rolling out here pretty soon. We want it in place before the 2016 election. These kind of things aren't picking up a lot of media yet because they're not completed, but we're working on them right now, where you're going to be able to pull up a candidate's name, see exactly who's donated to them. People are going to be able to click, and it's all going to be laid out for them. Government collects a massive amount of information on people. And I was able to see that as soon as I was sworn in and started looking at our campaign finance division, at our elections division. I thought, wow, we already collect huge amounts of information, whether that's right or wrong. You know, already state law, though, what we already collect. what we do is a terrible job of laying it out for people where they can easily digest it and see it.
I was going to ask, though, I mean, it's one thing to say that, you know, the Betterment of Squirrels Corporation wants this candidate to win, and the I Love Puppies candidate wants this candidate, but who's behind those groups? Do you ever, can the transparency go deep enough to find out that, yeah, that's the person behind the I Love Puppies group?
Yeah, I think every state, well, I know every state is struggling with that kind of that Russian nesting doll kind of problem.
Yes.
of that shell game. I have not found one state that's been able to find that magic bullet, and I don't know that. And there's some states, quite frankly, that don't want to find it because, you know, it's up to those individual legislatures, even if they want to tackle that issue. But as Secretary of State, there's things that I can do right now to solve transparency problems, because even with the data that we already collect, we're not using it properly. And so, again, I decided quite wisely to say, I'm going to focus on the things that I can work on and actually have an impact on right now. And we're really pleased with the way some of the projects are going. We're going to be coming out with apps. We've got a number of different things that are going to be transferred online that make it more user-friendly for not just for candidates, but for the public as well. All this stuff that we're doing on paper, really? I mean, it's 2015.
You mentioned working with clean elections. You've also been very concerned with what you call the jurisdictional reach of clean elections, especially when they find a particular group $95,000 for some last-minute ads against Scott Smith regarding his mayoral term right when he was leaving the mayoral. I mean, it was pretty transparent what was going on there, yet you're concerned with clean elections going after these guys. What's going on here?
Well, you know, Clean Elections and the Secretary of State's office work together on a number of different projects. They're a player in the elections world, absolutely. Important, the Secretary of State's office is a player as well, and ever since statehood, it's been pretty clear that there's certain government entities that are involved in the campaign and, you know, campaign finance, the campaign world. Secretary of State's office, the Attorney General's office, and now we have Clean Elections Commission. The voters voted in. I respect that. But where does the jurisdictional boundaries begin and where do they end? And that's what this intervening in this lawsuit was really about. I don't believe that government gets two bites at the apple. And what I mean by that is a crime may or may not have been committed. And that's for a judge to determine. But how many times and how many government entities can go after that same crime? That's the overall answer that we want, or, you know, the overall question that we want answered. The Secretary of State's office? Or is it the Clean Elections Commission?
But some are saying the Clean Elections Commission is the only agency out there going after these kinds of folks, this group in particular, that they went after it when no one else did.
Well, that is a completely false narrative. Again, this intervening in this case was not about protecting Legacy Fund. It was about asking a judge. We intervened to ask the judge to answer a larger jurisdictional question that we believe needs to be answered going forward. And this was a great opportunity to have that answered. But in this particular case, and that the 30-second sound bite on that is, Legacy Fund, the Secretary of State, Ken Bennett, at the time, you know, needed to be solved.
So when critics saying in this particular case you are siding with dark money, you say?
Absolutely not. I am asking a judge in this particular case to, it's an opportunity to intervene and to say who has jurisdiction over this stuff, because what you never want to have is an instance where one government entity says to a group, go right, and another says go left, because what happens? The group doesn't end up having any clear direction. You can't have a system that does that. And so what we're asking the judge to say is basically, who has jurisdiction? We think we know the answer of who that is, but we don't know. And we want the judge to let everybody know so that there's a clear answer by next year's election.
And again, you're asking for the opinion and the ruling of a judge. State law that candidates have to be notified of last-minute ads, and you have been quoted as, your office has been quoted as saying that you think that that is unconstitutional and that you are not going to enforce this law. First of all, are you not going to enforce this law?
No, we're definitely going to enforce the laws the legislature puts forward. Being a former legislator, nobody respects the role of the legislature more than I do. However, a little problem with the article that was written about that, and we won't get into that tonight. But what I will say is that we also have a duty, as our election director has a duty, when he sees something and he's making determinations on complaints. And on these particular complaints, they were all dismissed for various reasons. Most of them were for substantial compliance. They had substantially complied. Mm-hmm. So they were deemed, you know, hey, you've substantially complied. We're not going to pass this along to the Attorney General's office if your notification was 3 hours late. And then that was the case in many of these. But he noticed something and brought it forward to the legal community as a footnote and said, by the way, this is something you may want to take a look at. And said, you know, hey, legal community, hey, election law community and legislature, you may want to next year consider changing this or taking it off the books because a judge in 2003 said that this is most likely unconstitutional. And so it's kind of a big difference between bringing it forward, which is his probably duty to do as our elections director, and saying this is probably unconstitutional, and saying, you know, we're not going to enforce something, which certainly we're going to enforce the laws of Arizona.
So again, the idea that you would not enforce something because you or your elections director considers this particular unconstitutional. Again, critics and it can be argued that's not your job.
I don't believe it's my job to make law. I believe it's my job to follow the law. I also believe it's our duty as the chief election officer of the state, and also the one who has a big elections division. When they spot something in the law that they believe is unconstitutional, it's absolutely their duty to bring it forward to the legal community.
Indeed, but until the legal community takes action and a ruling is made, you still got to follow.
Yes, I think we would all agree on that. And so, but I don't want my election director or his staff to be afraid to say, hey, legislature, you should look at this. You know, to be afraid to come forward, and if they see things that they don't think are right, to have say people, you're not going to enforce it. He's enforcing the law just fine when things are dismissed for other reasons.
Okay, so a candidate must be notified of last-minute ads.
That's the law right now.
All right. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to see you. This was a pleasure. Appreciate it.